Hello everyone, welcome to the Redmen TV. It is the Deep Dive. I'm Chris Pajak, that is Josh Williams, and today we're going to be talking all about Harvey Elliott. Josh, we're going to get straight into it, mate, as we always do. Harvey Elliott comes into the side midweek against Wolves in the FA Cup, plays in Salah's position on the right-hand side. Now, I think a lot of Liverpool fans, I think it's fair to say, myself included here, are probably of the opinion that Harvey's not quite fast enough to play on that right-hand side, and yet we've not seen him there for a while. He slots in, he scores the winner, and he has an unbelievable game, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, I thought he was man of the match. He obviously scores the winning goal from about 30 yards out. Showcases an eagerness to press. Liverpool's press seemed restored in the game and things like that. And on top of all that, on top of his attacking performance, Liverpool's midfield, crucially, looked a lot more like resolute, compact, won actual challenges for the first time since, well, a few months, feels like. So I think those two elements, Elliott's attacking contributions and Liverpool's midfield being a bit more normal, I think have kind of contributed towards what is a really interesting talking point, basically, in that, you know, where does Harvey Elliott's future lie? Where should Klopp use him? Is he a forward? Is he a midfielder? Is he something in between? So I think it's a really interesting one for us to tackle, really.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it, mate. I think Klopp's got a bit of a conundrum on his hands, hasn't he? And I think, look, we're going to talk a little bit about the game against Wolves, of course, because he comes in and does really well. But for me, it was the makeup of the midfield three and the forward three that made the difference. I think, you know, for me, I saw a Thiago and an Naby Keita that got really high up and were winning the ball back in the opposition third. You know, actual gaggle pressing for a change, which we've not seen. I fucking love that gaggle pressing.
That's only one, that.
So they're winning the ball back high up the pitch, but the press in front of them was really good as well. And it's funny because we did something, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, on, you know, I hypothesised that could Cody Gakpo actually be a Firmino in the future, and he plays that number 9 role, and for once he was coming back into that space. And I felt like over the last few weeks Liverpool have been manufacturing midfielders to get into the space that used to be Firmino's on the pitch, because of the way that Nunes plays up top and is forward facing, dynamic, wants to get at the goal, but we've had no one to link the play. Cody comes in, doesn't have the best game, but he's an option for Liverpool's players to pass into. So it felt, what I'm trying to say, a really long-winded way of saying, it kind of felt like a Klopp team and a 4-3-3 that we've watched time and time again, whereas we did the video last week on what's wrong with Liverpool's 4-3-3. It was none of that. It was very much a Klopp's 4-3-3, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. You know, it was compact from start to finish. We touched last week on the dynamic that Nunes has added to things. Obviously, he didn't play against Wolves during the week, but just in terms of running away from the ball, leaving spaces in the 10 area. And the likes of Harvey Elliott have kind of been tasked this season, and a bit of last season, with occupying those spaces, basically. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. Liverpool deployed a number of players against Wolves who want the ball to feet, really, rather than players who are going to run them behind. Maybe that's why we looked a bit more compact in the middle. But overall, I think Elliott, it's just kind of a bit of a puzzle for Klopp to solve, really. And I think by painting a bit of a picture of him in terms of the data, maybe we can get a bit of an insight into what he looks like, and then we can move forward to the tactics board.
Yeah, well, let's look at it then. We've obviously got some of his attacking stats here in front of us, haven't we, Josh? Do you want to go through some of the data on the attacking side of things?
Yeah, well, if we're keeping it basic, I think above all else, Elliott looks like the kind of player who is basically like a creative, incisive kind of midfielder, really different to what we've seen at Anfield over the past couple of years. You know, if you think of Wijnaldum, if you think of Henderson, Milner, even Fabinho, those types of players, they were labelled as workhorses, weren't they?
Yeah, they're industrious rather than creative, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And I think Elliott, obviously, he's a lot more slight, both 5'7", 5'8", is he?
And in tiny, mate.
Yeah, and in terms of his technical ability, he's really clean on the technical side, really skillful in things, and that kind of translates into the data as well. So if we look at what he's good at and where he stands out, above all else, it's kind of like progressive passing, really, isn't it? Yeah. And on top of that, moving the ball into the penalty box. If you couple those in, you get a picture as to what he is in terms of like finding the most valuable areas of the pitch, through little passes around the corner, through the smallest of spaces. And aside from Thiago, Liverpool haven't really had that over the years, have they?
No, absolutely. I think, you know, the first thing that jumped out at me, and the data we're using is freely available to everybody. It's on fbref.com. The first thing that jumped out to me is, for all midfielders, he's 99th percentile, so he's in the top 1% of passes into the penalty area for Liverpool, for everybody in the midfielders all season long. So he's averaging 2.33 passes per 90 minutes into the penalty area. He's also 94th percentile, so top 6% of all the midfielders getting crosses into the penalty area. His progressive passes are really high. And if you look at his attacking stats on FBref over the course of this season, he shows up in almost every one of the attacking passing categories. You know, shot creating actions, he's creating 4.08. Shot creating actions, that's 94th percentile, top 6% again for midfielders for creating shots. I mean, this paints a picture of a creator, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And if you look at shot creating actions as well, I've just got up the top players this season in the league on a per 90 basis. Top of the league is Kevin De Bruyne. I think most people would agree he's the most creative player in the country. Then you've got Mahrez, Odegaard, Kulusevski, Bruno Fernandes, Kieran Trippier, players who are creative. Harvey Elliott is 21st for that. And if you think of the 21 players above him, most of them you'd expect. There's a few surprises in there, but most of them, you know, you got Saka, Grealish, Maddison, Foden, players who are creative. So Harvey Elliott's in amongst those. And to capture what we're talking about in terms of like progressive passes and passes into the penalty box, we're going to use a data viz to capture that, which we'll show now. For those who can't see it, it's progressive passes on one axis on a per 90 basis and passes into the penalty box on the other axis. And this is players in the Premier League this season who've played at least 450 minutes. And as you can see, you've got some of the obvious candidates in terms of like De Bruyne, Trent. St. Maximin, was that a surprise?
Yeah, a little bit, because I felt like he tends to dribble into the final third and doesn't pass it into the final third, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would agree. And you've got the likes of Kovacic and Thiago there. But as you can see, they're more down towards the bottom right of the scatter plot. And that's because they progress the ball. But in terms of passes into the box, not so much.
For anyone who's new and listening to this for the first time, and we're talking about progressive passes, what is the data on what a progressive pass is? How far do you have to move that ball forwards?
So I'll get it up because every definition is slightly different, but it's generally what you'd picture in your head to be a progressive pass. That's kind of what it is, really. Just as I'm getting it up now, so it's completed passes that move the ball towards the opponent's goal at least 10 yards from its furthest point in the last 6 passes, or any completed pass into the penalty area, and it excludes the defending 40% of the pitch. So it sounds really complicated.
It's not. They kick the ball far forwards.
Exactly, yeah. They move the ball forward. That's the basics of it. He could have just said that, couldn't he, to keep it simple for us, but that's the crux of it anyway.
So Thiago Alcantara, slightly deeper position.
Yeah.
You'd expect him to get more progressive passes because he's a forward-facing midfield player and he wants to move the ball forwards. We know that, you know. But Harvey Elliott maybe plays that little bit higher up the field, so it's actually probably more difficult to make a progressive pass because there'll be some kind of a block in front of you, maybe a low block or whatever. So it's actually for someone who plays quite high up the field to figure that highly, it's really good. There's only really De Bruyne and Riyad Mahrez are the 2 players on that scatter graph that I can see that maybe play as high up the pitch as him.
Yeah, I mean, Mahrez, he's finding the penalty box a fair amount, but in terms of moving the ball forward, progressive pass-wise, a little bit less. Harvey Elliott, as you can see, is kind of really in between Thiago and Mahrez as a player who does both to a really high level. Another player who's similar to him, as you can see, I've highlighted him, is Martin Odegaard. There's a reason I've highlighted him, which we will get to later. But in terms of what Elliott is on the ball, in terms of numbers, what we quantify and things like that, that's kind of what he is. He's that kind of needle player who will move the ball forwards to valuable areas of the pitch, basically.
Yeah.
And that leads us on to the defensive side of the game, which is a little bit more problematic, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, first thing, if you ever go onto FBref and you start looking at these things, the percentile thing I think is a really good way of looking at it because it gives you a big green bar when it's doing well and it gives you a red bar when it's not doing well. So I'm looking at the defensive stats now, and all I can see is tackles really low, like 92nd percentile. So, like, you know, really poor in terms of a midfield for how many tackles he's actually getting in. That's the same for percentage of dribblers tackled. It's the same for interceptions. It's the same for tackles and interceptions, and clearances is a little bit better. Like, he's 81st percentile rather than in the 90s, but all the others were between 90 and 99th percentile in a bad way for tackles, interceptions and all those types of things. So straight away you're thinking small guy playing in the middle of the park, not very strong, can't tackle.
Yeah, that's painted him in a brutal but honest way there, like, to be honest. I think if you look at his numbers, as you say, tackles and interceptions, so far this season in the Premier League, he's completed 17 of those. So for a bit of perspective on that, Milner is also on 17, and he's played less than half the number of minutes. And I think that accurately captures the difference really between Elliott and Milner as players. And if we move towards getting dribbled past as well, this is what's interesting really. So again, we'll use the database to capture this. You can see that now. And what you see in there is the percentage of dribblers that are tackled basically by players. So again, for a bit of perspective on that, 19 players have attempted to dribble past Harvey Elliott this season, and 15 have succeeded. That leaves him with a dribblers tackled rate of what you see in there, which is about 22% or so. And it ranks him as the second bottom in the league, ahead of only Stuart Armstrong. One of the lowest rates alongside a few other players that you'll recognise. And I think what's interesting as well is at the total opposite end of the scale, which I haven't obviously included here, you have Thiago in second for the whole of the league. And in third is Moises Caicedo as well, who's obviously linked with Liverpool. But one of the reasons I think this is interesting is because, again, similar to Elliott, right next to him is Martin Odegaard, who we knew was next to him when it comes to his on-ball actions as well, in terms of moving the ball into the penalty box and things. And I think he's a player who, he's now 5 years older than Elliott. And I think stylistically, if you look at his profile overall and things, I think the two are really similar. And I think Elliott can almost model his game on Odegaard moving forward, who has, interestingly, played in central midfield for the best team in the league this season.
Yeah, no, that's right, isn't it? I think, you know, that again, I just want to highlight something from the data that I noticed as well, because I think, you know, when I looked at, I was brutal before, and I apologise if you're watching, Harvey, but in some stats in the tackling things and those types of defensive stats, he does show up quite well. So he shows up 15th percentile in blocks, and he shows up 94th percentile in passes blocked. Now that leads me to sort of believe that he's got a good reading of the game, but technically when it comes to the tackling side of things, that he's not quite there yet. But, you know, if you're asking someone to create a pressing shadow or to get in a lane or intercept a pass, he actually can potentially be there because he can block those passes and stuff. He might not be recovering the ball as often as we'd like, but I think there's something there that he understands the game around him. He understands where he is in the system, but he's just not able to execute when it comes to actually defending a man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think he's like defensively bad, you know, in that sense really. I think it's just a case of, in terms of being defensively active and regaining the ball on a regular basis for your team, he just does that a bit less than many of his peers. But as I said, I think Odegaard is a really interesting example because he's played in a 3 for Arsenal this season, drifted into a 10 space with the ball, which is what Liverpool tend to do. He's the captain of Arsenal now. They've conceded the second fewest goals, I think. Second in the league for shots faced, and second in the league for expected goals against on a per-90 basis as well. So Arsenal have got the defence nailed down.
And they've got someone like Odegaard.
Exactly. So people have blamed Elliott as the problem as to why Liverpool are kind of wide open in the middle or whatever, when Arsenal are fielding a very similar player there and coping just fine. So that tells me it's not just a case of Elliott shouldn't be in midfield. It's more structural maybe, more to do with his teammates, and that's why it poses such an interesting tactical question for Klopp in terms of like a tactical system on the board.
Yeah, well, let's get the tactics board out then. Okay, so we've got the board out now. You can see Harvey Elliott. We've made it nice and easy for you this week to follow, and we've got Harvey Elliott as the yellow counter here. We've put him in the 4-3-3 formation because what we're saying here is along the lines of there's absolutely no reason that Elliott can't work in Liverpool's midfield, and we just maybe want to understand why it's not quite working in midfield at the moment, I suppose. So, Josh, in terms of with the ball, Harvey Elliott playing in this midfield, right of a 3, where do you expect him to pick the ball up and do his damage?
Yeah, well, it's important that you kind of said there that this is firmly with the ball to start off with, and given that, I think Elliott actually is a nice fit for Liverpool's system. I think he's arguably a better fit than Jordan Henderson in that sense, in terms of what Liverpool want to do when they're in possession of the ball. So, since Klopp took charge, past few years, it's generally just kind of been that. Yeah. And that's all Liverpool's number 8s have done, really. Sometimes they've progressed beyond the last line as well. But I think, as we said last week, with time, when Liverpool have got the ball, it's kind of looked a little bit like that, hasn't it? With them kind of tucking over and this player kind of operating as a bit of a number 10 in tighter spaces and things like that. And if you think of what Elliott is, technical, creative, good and tight spaces, he should technically be suited to playing like that, really. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think Klopp did it, essentially, because if you swap down places, put Elliott in the front line, which we touched on earlier, I don't think he's got the pace to be that player for Liverpool, which is essential for me in a Klopp system. And on top of that, he's left-footed, so he can't really play over here. And the left-footed guy that we've got over here is Mo Salah, who's just never absent. So I can see the sense in fielding him here, basically, compared to in the front line with the ball.
Yeah, okay, well, can I offer one more sort of addition to this? If I'm going to put him back onto the left wing, right? Now, in years gone by, this guy comes back, it's these two guys' job to get in there. And for that, I believe he hasn't got the pace. But if we just maybe look at Darwin Núñez again, and him moving that way, does that create space for Harvey Elliott to come inside from?
It does. That's a good shout. I like
and
that.
Then you've got someone with the eye for that pass on the ball in those areas. Now, I think part of the problem is we've not seen that for a start. But also, I think the other thing that we've seen quite often is the balls that we've been playing to Darwin have been from here or from Virgil van Dijk over here. I don't think we're progressing the ball through the midfield often enough. It's all, we're going to lump a ball over the top and he's going to chase it down and cause chaos. I just don't feel like if we're playing Darwin in that number 9, have we actually found the way to get him the ball by transitioning slowly through the sort of levels of the field. Now, let's talk it back to the midfield, because I think this is the point anyway. So we're with the ball. We've got Harvey Elliott up here. My issue at the moment is I feel like Harvey naturally wants to come out to this side, and quite often we end up with these 3 over here and no one in this space. I think with just a bit more of a movement to the centre of the park, it creates a little bit more space for these to work. Because my feeling watching the game, I don't know whether you agree with this, is we just get overcrowded in this area, and sometimes it's our own doing because we're bringing 3 players there, and then it's like it's not fluid the way it used to be.
Yeah.
And we know that Salah always gets doubled, so there's always a man over on them. There's always 4 or 5. I just feel like Harvey needs to temper that sort of want to get into this corner where Salah is and start thinking about getting away from it instead.
Yeah.
And I think that might help him as well.
Well, funnily enough though, that was going to be my next point actually, in terms of this kind of like triangle that we've got going on over here, that Liverpool have been working on for a while. You know, Trent has spoke about it. It's like a rotation kind of thing that's been added to Liverpool's game, like a layer that Liverpool have added over the years.
Yeah, because Trent likes to get into the half space a lot now, doesn't he, as well?
Yeah. Now, it used to be a case of Trent would kind of remain out wide at all times, really. Yeah. Salah would always be inside. This player would always kind of be covering, usually Jordan Henderson. But over time, we've got to a point where we're kind of behaving like a triangle, and these players can interchange positions and things like that. The issue that we've had with that is if that's Henderson, you don't want Henderson there.
No.
But because of the rotations that we're encouraging, really, sometimes that's Trent, and sometimes this is Salah as the deepest player of the 3. And that's fine if all 3 players are comfortable in all 3 roles. But it's been a bit of an issue because sometimes Henderson can end up as the most advanced player, penetrating the box, and you've got Salah down here and you've got Trent over here. I think one of the reasons, again, Elliott is quite suited to be in this right side of number 8 is if he is over here, Elliott's comfortable over here. Yeah. Elliott's comfortable here. So, you know, it's the kind of triangle that, although I see the structural issues that you're touching on, I think, again, with the ball, Elliott is suited to what Liverpool have been trying to move towards. As even with Nunes coming up here, we touched last week on how if Liverpool are going to move towards this. This kind of 10 space is left vacant because Nunes is going that way, stretching the defence. So if Elliott's moving up here, you've got these spaces here that he can use.
Yeah.
So I suppose what I'm trying to touch on is, I don't mind him as a forward. I think he can play as a forward. But the right side of midfield role for him, I don't think is that much of an issue as people are making out, specifically with the ball anyway.
Okay, so we'll move back and we'll talk about the defensive side of things then again. Josh, you believe that when Liverpool are defending, we slot back into a 4-5-1 with the wingers here. Why do you think this causes an issue? Is it a case of their starting positions, or is it a case of when they get into these it's a problem? Because it feels like it's probably starting positions because it's transitions we tend to concede from.
Yeah, it's more when Liverpool have just lost the ball and Liverpool get done on the break. And usually when that happens, Liverpool in a bit of a 4-3-3, a bit higher up the pitch, and Elliott is kind of caught up into these areas. And Trent, given how offensive Trent is in his nature, is usually about here as well. Bear in mind Virgil's over here, so Virgil's not necessarily sweeping up these spaces, like as well as Matip not sweeping up these spaces as well as Virgil does. So I think over here, Liverpool are just a little bit too offensive, and I think that's why it's made sense this player being Henderson the past few years, because it's allowed these two license. Mm-hmm. But defensively, it is a bit of an issue because for me it does seem a little bit overload. It seems a little bit like just too many players and suffering from like a bit of a lack of balance almost.
Yeah, lack of awareness, isn't it? I mean, these guys want to create. I mean, Trent Alexander-Arnold wants to create, Mo Salah wants to create, Harvey Elliott wants to create. It's almost like just one too many bodies on that side of the field. And I think when you've got Fabinho and Wijnaldum back in the day who would maybe do that, and Jordan Henderson, they're all wanting to do that. But unfortunately, when we get caught out, as you mentioned there, we're really high up the field, and I think Liverpool are just struggling to maybe get back in and cover that, because obviously we do that a lot, but also you've got to remember that the ball from centre Robbo is quite often on, and it's something that we do. So if we lose a long 70-yard pass or whatever it is, then we've got two full-backs out of the thing as well. So I suppose that let's move it on then. Where does Harvey Elliott for you fit into this side, and how do you solve the defensive issues with the 4-3-3 formation?
Do you know what's tricky? If we look at Odegaard as an example and what Arsenal are doing, this is how they line up. You know, it's Thomas Partey here, it's Granit Xhaka there, it's Odegaard there. With the ball, Odegaard tends to come over here, Partey moves up a little bit and stays in the centre, and Xhaka is kind of like a little bit of an in-between. Mm-hmm. And it works for Arsenal because the press is aggressive. Partey sweeps up a lot, he's a lot more mobile, for example, than Fabinho is, so he can cover a bit more ground. But here, crucially, you've got Ben White.
Yeah, centre-back.
He's basically a centre-back, isn't he? It's not Trent.
Yeah.
He can play, don't get me wrong, but he's just not as inclined to like take so many risks and bomb on and things like that, yeah. So, and
we've noticed a lot of City playing with these two sort of centre-halves essentially as full-backs at times this season, and then haven't we, with the Nathan Ake's of this world getting out there, and it does seem to be a bit, I don't know whether it's poor management in the transfer window, but it certainly seems to be a bit of a theme that well, the top two sides are both basically playing centre-backs at wing, but what that enables them to do is that enables them to essentially completely frigging overload up front because they've kind of got four centre-halves to do the business behind them. So what are you suggesting here, if Harvey Elliott can only play in the midfield without Trent in the team, or? Well, because that's a big shout.
Well, I think maybe Trent, when Harvey Elliott's doing a bit of this, maybe Trent could do some of that basically. Essentially like an inverted fullback, but like typical Guardiola, Philip Lahm, João Cancelo type thing. One of the issues with that is people would argue you want Trent there, don't you? You want Trent in the final third, really, because of his ridiculous passing range and things like that. So it's tricky. It could be a case of like when that's Henderson, centre up here, when it's Elliott, they swap. But for that to be justified as a decision, Elliott would have to be really creative. Yeah. He'd have to be, he'd have to be delivering basically. Yeah. I mean, have you got any?
Well, my thing, I think that for a start, I think Trent's average position this season is about 10 yards probably deeper than it was. I think it used to be sort of up here all the time, and it's maybe sort of closer to here now. So I think there has been some sort of idea around what that is. I'm not sure. I don't know whether it's because people are attacking that side so much more now that maybe he's not dealing with it quite as well, or because he's not getting the assists that he was getting last season. Trent, I think it's fair to say. Well, it's obvious to say as well. That for me, I don't know whether I can fix the problem, but I think I can diagnose the issue. And I do feel like just the balance of the midfield isn't right and something needs to give. One of the things that I did like from Naby Keita in the performance against Wolves was this ability to just run forwards and take men out the way. Like that's something that I really like from him, and I don't feel Harvey ever really goes past the forwards in terms of those type of runs. So it's going to be, I think this could be, and I think Klopp first of all holds Harvey Elliott, I should say, in high regard.
Yeah, I do.
And I think there's reason for that. But getting the best out of Harvey Elliott over the next 3 years might be one of the most difficult things Klopp's got to do, because I just don't see how, with Trent in the team and with Harvey Elliott in the team and with Mo Salah in the team, you're not just asking a hell of a lot from these two midfielders here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So it's all about who you get in. Like, let's say on a whim, we signed you Bellingham. Where does he play? It's not Thiago's position, it's not Fabinho's position.
Yeah.
So if you really like Harvey Elliott and you really want you Bellingham, does that actually necessitate a change of formation if you want Harvey Elliott in the side?
Yeah, well, potentially. I think Bellingham could obviously play here, could play as part of a two if you're using like a 6-6. And obviously if you sign Bellingham plays.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one because it's almost not Elliott's fault really. It's almost a case of, because of these two are so special, you know, it does kind of leave this open a little bit.
Is there any option for just, you know, when Thiago hangs up his boots or moves on, just moving him to the left-hand side?
Potentially, or putting Bellingham that side, because I do think with Elliott being left-footed, I do think he's better suited to this side of the pitch, like. And obviously Jude Bellingham can cover. Thiago's not a defensive problem by any means, but Bellingham can cover a lot more ground. One thing with Elliott, when he gets caught up high, recovery pace wise, he's not the quickest, is he? So once he's ahead of the ball, he's ahead of the ball. He's out the game. So it's an interesting one for Liverpool to consider. But this player here, this kind of like number 8 who transforms into a 10 when Liverpool have got the ball. Teams manage with those players. Like if you think of City have got a ton of them. You know, Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne, Gundogan to an extent. If you think of Man United, Eriksen to a little bit, Mason Mount, Martin Odegaard. These kind of like really almost like cute, incisive centre mids who a little bit need to be carried defensively, but offer a lot of value on the ball. It's just because Liverpool have Trent and Salah there, other teams maybe don't.
Yeah, and then I suppose the other thing is, this guy, does he have more legs than Fabinho?
Exactly, yeah.
And is he quicker at being able to get across? So there you go, that's the conundrum. I don't think we've solved it here today. If anybody else has solved the issue in the comments section, then please do let me know. And let Jurgen know as well, because it's something that he's going to have a big struggle with. We're going to go off and we're going to discuss the other guy on the field up here on this right-hand side. We're going to talk about Mohamed Salah next on redmenplus.com. If you want to go and watch that show, if you're a member of Redmen Plus, you can do. It'll be up at the same time as this show, of course. If you're not and you just want to join up and you like what we've been doing, then there's 2 deep dive shows every single week. The second one is always on Redmen Plus. You can sign up, just go to redmenplus.com, click that My Account button, log in, or sign up, I should say, as a club captain, and use the code SALAH, all capitals, and you'll get your first month for free. That's the code SALAH, all capitals, and you'll get your first month for free. What we're going to discuss with Mo Salah is, I've got a hypothesis that Liverpool are not making him the focal point of the attack this season. And I want to prove or disprove that hypothesis with the help of Josh Williams in this one. Join us over there, redmenplus.com. Thank you so much for watching. Leave us your thoughts on the show, whether you're enjoying it or you're not, whether you think we're full of shit or we're not, in the comments section. I'll see you next time. Ta-ra.
Hello, you wonderful Reds. I hope you enjoyed watching that. Did you know if you head over to redmenplus.com and sign up as a club legend, we will enter you into a monthly prize draw where you can win some amazing signed Liverpool gear. So get over there and get it done.